welcome back. All right, so I was thinking maybe I could do the hashtag thing, but maybe if you had a really good workshop, you could just raise your hand. Yes, both hands. Who's gonna raise both hands for their workshop? Awesome, excellent, good, it was good. That's what we aim for. And lunch was good? Good, awesome. So this afternoon we have a keynote, which I'm very excited about, and then we have 2 more workshops. And following those workshops, we have our social networking at Seasons, which is on, I believe it's on the corner of First and F. It's just a little bit less than a mile walk if you're staying here and you want to walk down. And we'll be there from 5 to 7 and hope to see you all there. I want to remind everybody about the app and rating the workshops that you're in. Does anybody need help on finding where to rate your workshop? Okay, so you open up the workshop that you just attended. So if you were in, I can't think of a name of one, in A1, you would open up A1, tap on A1, and then up near the upper right hand, it says rate, and there's like 3 little stars, and push that. Did it work? Give me a thumbs up. Yes. Okay. I think there are a few of you are not able to put the app on your phone, you're completely appless. Now I'm thinking of the hashtag thing. Hashtag appless. If you're appless, we do have a few paper copies of the evaluation form that you can get at the registration desk. But we only have a few of those. So if you have the app, we really need you to use the app. If you don't have the app, then we can take care of you at the registration desk. Okay, so I am going to introduce our afternoon keynote, Dr. Linda Elder. Much of what we talk about in coaching, in at least child welfare, centers around our desire to help increase or enhance the critical thinking abilities of social workers. How many of you have thought that in the past? What can we do to increase or enhance critical thinking? And in fact, as a training organization, we get requests to teach classes. Can you put together a class to teach critical thinking? And we can do that class and we can teach that class, but we're not really sure that it's actually going to help improve critical thinking. What we know and what we have learned more and more through coaching and through our efforts with coaching is that critical thinking comes with practice, right? It comes with reflection and it comes with talking about practice, not necessarily talking about cases, but talking about practice and how we do business and how we think through and about our families and children that we serve. And so when we were putting together this conference, it seemed really logical to have a keynote presenter who could really help us dive into this subject of critical thinking. Dr. Linda Elder is here with us. She is an educational psychologist and a prominent authority on critical thinking. She is president of the Foundation for Critical Thinking and executive director of the Center for Critical Thinking. She has co-authored 4 books, one of which will be available to purchase. You have a small guide with you at your desks, at your tables, and I can say that in the conversations that I've had with her, albeit they have been short, I have really left inspired and has really left me in a very thoughtful place and a really excited place to share her with you. So let's welcome Linda Elder.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here with you today and to participate in this important event. I have a very brief amount of time to do a lot. So I'll try to do a little bit that will hopefully move you to some deeper levels of thinking about your work, and maybe even about your life. There's a sense in which you might argue that there isn't a more important field of study than your field, because of the significant implications that come with your work. The level of responsibility that you have is magnificent, as you know. The level of power that you have is often magnificent, though you may not feel that. You may feel that you would like to have more power because for whatever reasons you feel that you can't do what you'd like to do. But in any case, we know that in the field of social work, there is a tremendous amount of responsibility that comes with this certification that you carry with you. And so when you're focusing on concepts, any concept, such as coaching, you want to ask yourself, well, how can I think deeply about this conception, this concept of coaching? Because you have these theories and these ideas and these other concepts you can add to your concept, and in the end, what is your concept of coaching? How do you think of it in your mind? What do you include in it, and what do you exclude? The term coaching itself is what I should call neutral, in the sense that you can coach well or you can coach poorly. You yourself have witnessed poor coaching, have you not? Of course, you probably haven't engaged in it, but you've witnessed it. And you've witnessed high-level coaching, have you not? So within every field of study, there are people functioning at high levels, at very high levels. And there are people functioning at very low levels in every field of study. And then the vast majority are functioning where? I hate to say it, but in the mediocre middle. True critics of every discipline ask the hard questions, and they're willing to hear the answers. And they're looking for explicit tools to develop their reasoning abilities within their fields of study. So if somebody comes to you with a menu for coaching to improve your coaching, I want you to ask some deep questions. How do these ideas help me with my parents and my children today, in fact? What are the real tools that are added to my toolbox? What we know about the human mind is a lot of things. And now we live in this explosive postmodern era where science is left and right trying to tell us a lot more about the brain that connects with the human mind. And now we're even more confused than we were before. Because a lot of this brain research does not translate into the mind realities that we're told they should translate into. And yet we know many things about the human mind that we should take into account as human beings, as professionals, and you as social workers specifically. The best thinkers who have focused on thinking historically have uncovered certain realities about the human mind. And we can go all the way back thousands of years, at least to the point of Socrates, to find these deeper tools. And the people who are the most well-read are the ones who are looking for those tools that have been brought forward through history. We're not just looking at the latest books on the shelf today, but we're asking, what are the deeper understandings that have stood the test of time? Our work at the Foundation for Critical Thinking directly connects with these deeper understandings. 2,400 years ago, Socrates said, let's focus on reasoning. We've got all these tools, scientific tools, mathematic tools being developed, but what about the human mind? What about what is happening in the privacy of the human mind? How do we intervene in that? How do we become more rational? How do we become more reasonable? Why do people say one thing and do something else? And why do they do that over and over again? That's what Socrates wanted to know, and that's what I'd like to know. And why do I do it? So when people come to you, if anybody comes to you with the easy answers, you'll know there's a problem, because there are no easy answers here. Not when human reasoning is in the room. And human reasoning is in the room when a human being is in the room. What we don't realize is that the thing that you do and that I do most often, that we do maybe almost more than anything else other than breathing and things like that, is reasoning. You wake up in the morning and you start reasoning. The minute you wake up, and in the middle of the night, you're probably reasoning too, but we'll set aside dreaming for a minute. We'll have enough difficulty with the conscious state. So you are continually reasoning. You get up in the morning, you decide what to do, you decide what to wear, you decide what to eat. You prepare your mind for the day. You're making decisions. You're continually reasoning. You're making hundreds of inferences a day. And yet, we learn almost nothing about human reasoning as we come up through schooling. So how do you get command of the reasoning that you're bringing into the room? How do you get command of, how do you help other people command their reasoning that are under your protection? That's a scary word, isn't it? I mean, you're protecting people. That's a big thing. Let's hope you're protecting them through the right things. You see what I mean? How do we know? How do we know this is the right answer? How do we know? So what it is helpful to me is to understand some of the pathologies that we face. And I've put here up for you one of our diagrams from the Thinker's Guide to the Human Mind, which deals with both egocentric and sociocentric thinking. You do not have a copy of this. You have another Thinker's Guide that we'll be looking at presently. But in this guide, we deal with the barriers to human thinking. And this is what I am arguing. I'm arguing that we are living a life in which we are continually using these sorts of lenses. We see the world through our prejudices, our biases, our egocentric pathologies, our groupthink tendencies. I want to read to you, this is a very brief reading from the New York Times review of books that came in the Sunday paper. There is a book out now entitled, you don't need to write this down, The Knowledge Illusion, Why We Never Think Alone. We know less than we think we do. Groupthink fills the gap. That's the emphasis here. And this author is saying that, these authors are saying that they've discovered these things. We think we know a lot, even though individually we know very little, because we treat knowledge in the minds of others as if it were our own. Think about that for a minute. And what that means, for example, is that if I'm saying things to you right now that are intuitive to you, then you think they're your own. But if I said, now you articulate what I just said to the other person sitting next to you, what do you think would happen? You probably have difficulty. That's an example of what they're talking about. And then people rarely appreciate their ignorance because they lock themselves inside an echo chamber of like-minded friends and self-confirming news feeds where their beliefs are constantly reinforced and seldom challenged. Well, you can think about your clients and apply this to them, but I'm asking you to apply it to your own mind. It's easy to find the problems in other people's thinking. That's not what this is about. Because if we can't discover this for ourselves in the privacy of our own minds, then I'm not sure we're able or willing to help someone else. We're not able to help someone else yet because we don't see what's really happening in human thought. So, and one other point, most of our views are shaped by communal group think rather than individual rationality, and we cling to these views because of group loyalty. This is not new. We've learned this. We know this. Groupthink, you've heard of that. We started talking about that decades ago. So we've talked about it, and we've read a little bit about it, but what are we doing with it? So if I'm doing a presentation on sociocentric thinking and focusing on how groups affect our individual behavior, then I'm asking myself this. If that's true, then Linda, how are you being affected right now by these people in the room? Right now. How are you affected when someone else walks into the room? How does that affect you? Because you're telling everyone that the groups affect them, so what about where the buck stops? Right here. So suddenly, I'm seeing myself being sociocentric, as it were, right and left. Because this is the natural path of the human mind. So we have these pathologies, and we must understand them, and we must use these tools to analyze ourselves so that we can free ourselves from our own pathologies to the extent that we can. When you meet the first perfect person that you will meet in your life, when you finally do meet that person, they will have none of these problems. Because if you could get rid of this, you could achieve perfection, I think, in human thought. But since we are fundamentally flawed out of the gate through self-deception, biases, prejudice, and so forth, we start at a great disadvantage. Think about it this way. Think about how much weight we give on how people look. As soon as you meet someone, what do you think? Oh, she's shorter than I thought she'd be. Oh, yeah, she looks like her picture. She's got good teeth, or not so good. You know, these are the things that we think. The hair. I had someone at a workshop one time leave me a note at noon that said, now I'm going to fix my hair when I say this. She said, Dr. Elder, I said she, Dr. Elder, your hair does not look in the back the way I think you would want it to look. So now I'm not going to turn around. Do you see how superficial we are? It's not just, I'm using one example. We're all like this. You think how ageist we are in our culture. As you get older, you begin to see this. You become less and less of a person in our society. And instead of honoring wise, elderly people, we don't. We put them in the waste can. That's part of our philosophy. So you know this better than I do. You see this in your work. These are realities that we cannot sweep under the rug. Because if we sweep them under the rug, we misunderstand what this work entails. That is, work of developing the mind. Now, I've talked a little bit about the barriers. Now I want to talk about the tools that move us forward. You have the miniature guide to critical thinking concepts and tools. And I'd like you to, I'm going to focus on just a couple of these tools right now. We have until what time? 1:30? If you look with me on page 19, what you see, by the way, in this guide is an overview of our toolbox in our approach to critical thinking. These tools were initially developed by my colleague, Dr. Richard Paul, who founded the Center and Foundation for Critical Thinking 37 years ago, and who passed away in the fall of 2015. He was also my husband of 20 years, and the loss to the intellectual community of his mind is profound. But still, we have tools that he has helped us with, and we can learn these tools and get a lot of mileage out of them if we understand them and if we internalize them. So if you look at page 19, you see an overview of our theory in addition to the barriers of egocentric and sociocentric thinking that I briefly mentioned. So if you understand our toolbox, which you don't because you're just beginning to be introduced to it, you will learn the standards, you'll learn about the intellectual standards, the elements of reasoning, and intellectual traits, and I'm going to give you the briefest overview of this right now. So the idea is that the best thinkers within every field and within every era, historical era, embraces intellectual virtues. So by that I mean they embrace clarity, accuracy, relevance, depth, breadth, logicalness, fairness, sufficiency, and there are others that we could add. We have a few on page 19 of the hundreds or more extant in a given natural language. No one, by the way, has fully analyzed the intellectual standards that exist within natural languages. We have a guide to intellectual standards which takes you beneath this first level. But if you turn to page, let's see, what? Intellectual standards, give me a second. Turn to page 10, and you see these standards again with some questions we can ask when we are taking them seriously. Now you're beginning to see part of the toolbox that you can use with your clients. We'll be going into these deeper in the workshop this afternoon. But notice that every question here represents an intellectual tool, an intellectual move that could be made. Often you're in a discussion with someone and you really don't know what they have even just said. So what about this? Let's see, I didn't understand what you said. Could you say that in other words? Could you give me an example of that? Let me say in my own words what I think you said, and you tell me if I'm right. Have I gotten your meaning precisely? Accuracy. How do we know if it's true? This is a big one today in our world. It's sort of bizarre if you think about it, the way that people think about facts. By implication, a fact is true. I mean, the dictionary helps. And we can ask very fundamental questions. You see, this is not rocket science. But what it does require is a considerable amount of practicing to bring these into your thinking. See how intuitive this is? This is coming from everyday use of language. No special languages in our theory, because we think within our natural languages, and we need to be able to use concepts well within that language. Precision means you're giving me enough detail to understand what you're saying. I understand it. I get it because of the level of detail that you've given me. Often in our society, what's happened? We're truncating, we're shortening the messages. Remember the old days, people wrote a long letter? I mean, 100 years ago, people wrote long letters. A lot of our history is found in those long letters. Who writes a long letter today? Then we moved over to emails. And even then, those were pretty lengthy, weren't they? But now we do texting. And we don't worry too much about whether the word is spelled correctly or not. And we don't even worry about whether the word is the actual real word that we wanted to say. We know the other person will interpret it correctly. But you can sometimes have a blooper in that. I mean, some of the times when you're dictating, the word is not what you said. So what does this mean? It's Orwellian. By that I mean, what we're doing is we're living more and more in the Orwellian future, where we're using fewer and fewer words to mean the complex, to represent the complex realities that we face, and therein lies the problem. So what we want with precision is to bring the thinking out. Give me more details. I need to know I want to know what you feel. I want to know how you think about the relationship. I want to hear your deepest thoughts. How many people say that? They're afraid of the deepest thoughts. Maybe they don't have any deep thoughts. Relevance. How many times have you been in a meeting? How many times have you been in a meeting and a few minutes after, or let's say 30 minutes later or 45 minutes later, not much had been achieved? And often that's because people are violating the standard of relevance. Somebody raises the question, there's a little bit of discussion, somebody throws something else in. Well, then that's a different question. Now we have a different path. What happened to this path? Thinking is driven by questions. We were going down this questioning path, somebody throws in some, now we're over here. Are we going to do this? We're going to focus on this question for a while, or are we going to go back over here? Can we deal with both of them at the same time? I don't think so. So we do this for a while. No one noticing that we actually jumped over here to another rail. Then what do we do? 10 minutes here, and then somebody jumps into another rail. So now we're over here. An hour later, our time has been wasted. And I don't know about you, but I don't have any time to waste. So these standards are essential to the life of the intellectual. And the best thinkers have always embraced these and do embrace them. And they may not use the term intellectual standards. They may not have ever heard of it. But when you listen to them, you can see that they use information that is accurate. They are precise in their thinking. Their thinking stays relevant. They focus on the significant, not the trivial. And they're fair in their dealings. You see, these are some examples. So this is getting you into the toolbox of critical thinking a little bit. Then move over to get a little bit of a flavor of the elements of reasoning, page 3. Whenever we reason, these parts are present. These to me are essential understandings to any educated person. And we should be teaching these in the early years and all throughout. Why? Because what you see here on page 3 represents what's happening in the mind when you reason. How often do you reason? Continually throughout the day. That means right now you have a purpose. And I could ask you to write down your purpose right now. What is your purpose for being here? And many of you will say, to learn better coaching strategies. And some of you will write other things that aren't relevant to that. Like, I wanted to be away from my desk for a while. Maybe not you, but you know, some other hypothetical persons. Or my purpose is to play on my phone while you're talking so that I can do whatever I want to do. That might be a purpose that people have. You can't control other people's purposes. That's a good move to start with. You don't control the purposes of your children that you work with. You don't control the purposes of the parents that you work with, or the elderly, or the infirm. You don't control anyone's purposes. But they have them. And when you know that they have them, that helps. So you can say, well, what is your purpose right now? And notice we can go around the wheel. What questions are you asking? See, I can look at the way you live your life. If I followed you around for a week, and I could tell you what questions you're asking. Because your behavior implies the questions. Right? So if I followed you, if I shadowed you for a week and you were out in the field and you were doing your best every day and you were really, that's all you were doing was work, work, work to help the people, that tells me a lot about the questions in your head. And if you're supposed to be working, instead you're playing because you want to be the best tennis player, and every minute you get, you're on the tennis field, tennis court, that tells me something about your questions, doesn't it? So, and what about the information that you use? What about the information our politicians use? I couldn't avoid that. It just was there. You know, the information, what is the information that we're using? And think about all of the false information out there. How does that happen? When people should be able to see that it's an easy move to figure out whether the information is accurate. Why would we begin with the assumption that you just believe what someone says? That's bizarre. You believe what someone says because they're on your feed, that whatever that is. I mean, I have a sense of it. But so information we all use. We continually use information. The question is, how good is it? Is it accurate? Is it relevant? If it's accurate, we can check to see that it's true. We can find the sources. It's basic moves, but we don't make them. So I'm not going to go around the rest of the wheel. You get the conception. You begin to get it. So we need to be able to access our reasoning, and we need to be able to apply the standards to our reasoning, and to do this well takes years of practice. We do have a book that you may be interested in getting from our website, criticalthinking.org, which is 30 Days to Better Thinking and Better Living, which gets you started if you really are interested in developing your own mind as a thinker. Now, let me focus on one other piece of this. If you could we're going to focus on the intellectual standards. I'm sorry, intellectual virtues, page 13. Yeah, just showed the top of that. As developing thinkers, what we really want is not just to develop skills and abilities, because let's face it, some of the people who are already employing critical thinking are using skills and abilities, but they lack these intellectual virtues. The fair-minded thinker embraces these and hopes to embody these. And these are essential to the highly skilled social worker. You can target any one of these to see this. Let's take intellectual humility. Now, when we embody intellectual humility, we are able to distinguish at any moment between what we know for sure to be true and what we don't know. So the best student could stand up in front of the class and say, here's what I know about what Socrates said, and here's what I don't know. I only know this little amount. That's all I know. But I know that part. And I know that he said those things, and I know that because of this, and the other thing. That's all I know, though. I don't know anything else. If you say, well, what did Plato think of this? You can say, I just told you I didn't know anything else. I only know this. Yeah, but just what do you think Plato thought of this? Well, I can't answer that because I've already told you I don't know. So I don't know is a very good starting place. When I look at, I don't want to take anything too controversial, but when I think about the refugees in this world right now running, and the world that we live in, I don't know what to do. I mean, really, I don't know how to answer some of these huge, pressing questions. And yet, on the right, left, and everywhere in between, the answer seems simple, doesn't it? We don't want to go to war. We do want to go to war. We don't want to threaten North Korea. We do want to threaten North Korea. We don't want to threaten them like this. We do want to threaten them like that. What is that? You see? How do we deal with these very serious realities? I don't know. So humans need a healthy dose of I don't know. And we had a keynote address at one of our conferences. We've had 37 international conferences, and we had a keynote address years ago where a philosopher named Ed Damer had everyone in the room say, in connection to this conception of intellectual humility, he had us all say, now, he said, I have my students do this at the beginning of the semester. I want you to repeat after me. You don't have to do this. He said, repeat after me. I'm probably wrong. Okay, so I'm probably wrong. So he had all of us, 500, 600 people saying, I'm probably wrong. Start there. And then my colleague, Richard Paul, said, well, I would have modified that to, I may be wrong. Because maybe it's not that you're probably wrong. Maybe it's that you could be wrong. So when we bring intellectual humility to our work as social workers, when you bring it to your work, you walk in the room in a very different way than the person who knows it all. The opposite is intellectually arrogant social worker. You can distinguish the difference in your mind right now. The person who, they already know what the answer is before they walk in the room. They've got the information. They've got the file. There's nothing to do here. It's all cut and dried. You walk in with that person, suddenly to you, it's not so cut and dried. It's a lot less clear. But this person's got it all figured out. And you can see they're missing something. You see? And that helps us grow because you can see that other way and you can see the problems with it. You see? And then you have to bring it over to yourself. Eventually you have to figure out what your problems are. But part of that is understanding clearly what someone else is doing wrong. So intellectual humility is required in your field. And then we can look at others, intellectual autonomy. This means that we're able to stand alone against every single person in the world, if necessary. But we do that based on good judgment and reasoning, not because we want to be different. So often our, kids will say things like that. They're trying to be different, so they got a different kind of tattoo in a different kind of place. That's the way that they're different. But when you have intellectual autonomy, it means that you yourself have thought through issues deeply, an issue deeply, and as well as you can, given your capacities right now, you've done your absolute best thinking, and as it turns out, your thinking is different from all these other people in the room. But when you have intellectual autonomy, it doesn't matter. It doesn't bother you. It doesn't mean that you think less of them, or that you'd like to kill them, or you want them to leave the country. It just means, no, I just don't agree with that. How many times have you been in a meeting when you disagreed, using good judgment and good reasoning, but you knew better than to even say anything because no one was going to listen to you? Or you knew one other person in the room is reasonable, so you try to focus on that person and ignore the others. You're laughing a little too much, you see. You know the tendencies, right? So intellectual empathy, well, we know we need this. What is empathy? Empathy means we feel for the other person. We can imagine what they may be feeling. That's related to sympathy. But intellectual empathy goes a little further. Intellectual empathy means that I can think your thoughts to your satisfaction. And a good way to test whether you can do this is to say, let's say if you're in an argument with your significant other, you can say, all right, here's what we'll do. You argue from my point of view for the next 5 minutes, and I'll argue from your point of view. And I'll start. Okay, and when you start, you have to do it in good faith. Right? And I did this with my son when he was about 8 or 9 years old. And after I had done this only once or twice, I said, okay, Rush, here's what we'll do. I'll argue from your point of view, you argue from my point of view. He said, no, Mom, I'm not willing to do that, because if I do that, I'll have to change what I think. See the move? He realized that the exercise itself would force a shift in his thinking. And he was unwilling. Now, an adult would never say such a thing, but children are more honest. So it's very true. So try that. And with your clients, you see, a big problem between parents and children is that the parents actually lack intellectual empathy. They don't lack empathy, but they lack intellectual empathy. And often the children also lack that. So we have to take these tools and we have to unpack them and help our clients work with the tools. And this is a beginning place for that. So you have a sense of the tools of critical thinking. This afternoon we're going to go into these at a little deeper level, but what is most important is to understand that these tools are available to you. The question is, how do you embrace them? How do you learn them? And to me, learning to reason well is like learning to play the violin. How much time do you think it would take to learn to play the violin? Well, you have to ask this question. What do you mean by that? Play the violin so that we could stand to hear you in the room, right? And so you're not just scratching and squeaking. That would take a while, wouldn't it? That's the way human reasoning works. But because we don't learn this, we take our reasoning for granted. You assume that you're a good reasoner because you reason and you're an adult. People don't talk about reasoning or these tools or how to use these tools or how to really intervene in the mind. But I can teach the intellectual standards and the elements of reasoning, and people can still be highly self-deceived and highly intellectually arrogant. Why is that? Because in the final analysis, each one of us believes that we ourselves are the way, the truth, and the light. And with that, I want to say thank you. I hope to see you in my session this afternoon. Thank you.